Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. This is Darren Mitchell on the first day of November where I am, but my guest who's from Zurich in Switzerland, although he happens to be in a different place in the world right now, but he's originally from Zurich. Mr. Markus Neukom, welcome on 31st of October, which is Halloween.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Darren. And where I am right now is Boston. So Halloween is a huge tradition here, but
Yes.
fortunately not in our house at the moment.
So does that mean you've had to make sure that all your lights are off and nobody can answer the door when little kids knock on the door and do the trick and treat?
Pretty much like that, yes. But we still have some candy in spare, if someone
Just in
makes it
case.
to the house. Yes.
Well, it's funny. One of the benefits of where I live, we're on 2.5 acres, so there's not a lot of houses compressed together. So we're not that attractive for kids doing things like trick or treat, nor are we attractive for the door-to-door salesperson, which, by the way, in Australia is pretty illegal now. But because there's so many houses spread out, it's not worthy to come down our
So funny.
street.
It's a pretty similar situation now at the place we are. It's not like 2.5 acres, but it is widespread.
Mm.
And, the brother-in-law where we're staying right now, he said no one will come because they don't find it. So it's funny.
Fantastic. So, Marcus, looking forward to this conversation. You've been in leadership for a long time. You're an executive coach, leadership strategist, advisor, and been
Mhm.
running your business for a number of years. Markus Neukom International. Um,
Correct.
love to delve in. There's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, particularly things like operational leadership and being more strategic and getting away from the day-to-day
Mhm.
stuff, but also things like imposter syndrome, which
Mhm.
if I'm being honest, the workshops that I do with leaders, there is a constant theme that goes through that I think most of us, if we're honest, do suffer from a little bit of imposter syndrome. So, love to delve into that. Before we do, though, always like to get a bit of background from the guest in terms of what got you into. I know you've got a background a little bit in sales as well, but what got you
Mhm.
specifically into the sales area, but then more recently working with the leadership teams and executives that you do in what you do
Mhm.
today. So always interested in delving into the people's background in terms of story.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell you. Um, you know, a thing which probably many of our listeners can recognize, my dad was in sales.
Right.
So as a little boy, I always observed his life. And I just thought, what that is doing, that sounds interesting. He's meeting so many people, he has so many lunches, and he makes some decent money. And I realized I am definitely his son because, you know, as we definitely both share, sales has a lot to do with natural talent. You can
Mm.
teach sales, but either you have it innately or you don't. And I was fortunate to have it. And I realized, Darren, that the number one success factor for me was loving people,
Hmm.
being interested in people's lives, interested in people's stories. So I didn't actually go into sales until I decided to leave my corporate career for the first time and went on a European singing tour. So I wanted to become a singer.
Hmm.
And when I returned, um, I reached out to a friend of mine who was um, head of one of these agencies of Zurich Insurance. And he said to me, you'd be born to become a insurance sales agent. And, if I had known what I really said yes to in terms of reputation, because for me, it was a reputable position to have. And that's when I landed in sales. And I remember there was one night where the sales director came to the office and he said, Marcus, one might think of you what they want. However, one thing I have to give you. Out of 10 times, 7 or 8 times you say, sir or madam, I'm so looking forward to getting to know you. How do you do that?
Mm.
We are so seasoned. We get a quota 2 or 3 out of 10.
Yeah.
And you as a newbie come and have 7 or 8 out of 10. And I reflected for a moment and I said, you know what? I believe because I'm not selling,
Yeah.
I am interested in people.
Mm.
And you know, how I got into leadership development was I basically just followed my intuition and I went from sales into HR. In HR, I realized I'm at the wrong place because I have to go back into operations. So I went into teaching, and from teaching, I was called, it was literally a calling from an organization from the US to become a senior vice president in an outplacement company. So we had a co-lead, and there I realized, gosh, executive coaching, coaching those people who got fired, who were made redundant. I was in
Hmm.
charge of all the expats in Zurich at that time.
Yeah.
I just realized, gosh, that's what I really burn for. So basically, everything that I had gone through and experienced prepared me for that one position.
Mm.
So this is a long answer for a short question.
No, it's a really interesting well, it's an interesting answer, but it's not it's a legitimate background, which I find intriguing because I was speaking to somebody yesterday and saying that it's fascinating that how many people don't start out their career in the career that they eventually end up doing. So it's like stepping stones, and I often refer to the hero's journey that we're all on a hero's journey,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
everything we're doing is leading to the next step, but probably
Mhm,
preparing us for the step two, three head,
mhm,
3 steps ahead. And
mhm,
often you can only join the dots when you look back, as Steve Jobs used to always say. I just want to go back to one thing you mentioned with your sales director back at the insurance company. You said
mhm,
7 out of 10, you're saying, I'm looking forward to getting to know you.
mhm,
And you said you didn't feel as if you were selling. And I want to pick up on that because I think there's a lot of people in sales who believe their role is to sell. And yes, it is. You've got to hit a quota, you've got to make sure we're profitable as a business, et
yeah,
cetera, and growth is
yeah.
expected. But did you feel in retrospect you had a different attitude towards that to the point where people felt and look when you said reputable in
Mhm.
insurance, right? And maybe Zurich in Zurich there's more a
It
better
wasn't even in
reputation.
Zurich, I tell you that
Okay.
much, Darren.
But but I know my own experience. I dabbled in insurance many years ago and it wasn't a reputable role. But what was it about your approach to then selling? Was it the fact you were there to help people? Was it there you were actually there to build genuine relationships, and from that, the sale came? Or was there something that you look back on and think, you know what, I was different, and that's why I was, I guess, more successful or had better cut through my than my peers or my colleagues?
It's a very interesting question. I was just reflecting while I listened to you, Darren. And you might be familiar with the Asian way of doing business. On the first dinner, you do not speak about business at all,
Mm,
and the business follows thereafter when they like you and they trust you. And I would say it was very similar. Like I just I just saw the scenes. Like I arrived, we had coffee, we had cake, we talked about life, they talked about them. And I believe one of the real talents I had a nick for questions.
hmm
Because I believe something really inherent was the curiosity to find out about the other person.
mm,
For example, I signed the saying, everyone is a friend who I have not known yet.
yeah,
So that's how I approach people.
yeah,
And then, and you see, I never learned how to create trust or how to build trust. It just came innately. And then suddenly I said, look, why we're really here is to look at your insurance situation. So tell me more about your life. So, of course, the wife sat often next to it. I saw children. I saw cars outside. So they started telling me about their life. And I said,
mm,
look, I feel like this is really precious to you. what you have here. And my goal is I leave here if I feel you are insured ideally. I'm willing to leave here. I'm even willing, and I think that was one of my really, someone would say a trick.
Yeah.
I am even willing to help you save premium money if I feel you are not ideally insured.
Hmm.
I'm not going to sell you anything. I will listen to you. I will take stock of what you tell me. And then, if you allow me to, then, or give permission, then I will show you what I personally would do if I've been in your situation.
Mm.
Is that fair?
Mm.
And 9 out of 10, they said, yes.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what it was. I believe it had to do that they felt this guy is here for me
Mm.
and he's not trying to fill a sales quota with me because it would not work anyway.
And that's interesting because there are a lot of, and we talk in sales a lot about this concept of commission breath. That people have commission
They
breath,
smell
and
it. Yes,
and
and they
and
smell
sometimes that's
it.
conditioning that we're told as salespeople, hey, you need to always be looking at closing, closing, closing. But if you can build credibility and if you can build trust to the point where
Mhm,
people they like you, they trust you, they
mhm,
respect you,
mhm,
and
mhm,
they genuinely get the sense, and this is not a trick, but they genuinely get the sense that you're there to help them,
mhm,
then they're more likely to open up and potentially consider a solution to a problem they have. But it has to be
mhm.
authentic, and this is where you've got to be genuine about this. And
Yeah.
I'm interested to know were there any times where you were saying that, where you had the opportunity to demonstrate and so that just enhanced your credibility because it's one thing to say that this is what I would do, this is my recommendation, and then
Yeah.
when it
Mhm,
gets to the pointy and you've got to ask for the sale, right, you've got to get over that
mhm,
hump of the objection and so forth, and
mhm,
and
mhm,
sometimes that's where it can become a little bit salesy for some.
mhm,
Were there
mhm,
times where you said, you know what, this is not the right solution for you, or this is what I'm
mhm,
suggesting, so you actually had to pack your bag up and leave because hey, I can't
mhm,
help you.
mhm. So, we had a portfolio, as you have in insurances, and it was one of my duties to reach out to every client at least once a year. And I inherited an old portfolio from my predecessor. So this was this guy, Louis. He passed away a long time ago. So I reached out to him and I saw he's an artist.
Mm.
Huge house overlooking the Lake of Zurich. I went there. He welcomed me hesitantly. He's one of those 9 out of 10. And he literally said to me when I got there, honestly, sir, I don't know why you're here. I don't need anything. And I said, you know what? Let us look at your situation for a moment. And he was one of those guys, Darren,
Mm.
where I left with less premium than I came in. You know what I gained? A lifelong friend,
Yeah, yeah.
a lifelong friend. And this is what I learned from and I have goosebumps, by the way, when I think back to that. This
Mm.
is what I learned from my mentors. This is what selling is all about, is relationship,
Mm.
literally relationship. He became a friend in his early 70s, and I think he passed away in his mid 80s.
Yeah.
We had endless conversations. He said, Marcus, had you insisted on changing my policy just an iota, you'd have been gone.
Mm.
And I said, no, I know. I left with less premium. And I even had to justify it to my boss, who's not the sales manager, but the boss,
Yeah.
who was basically my mentor.
Yeah.
And he said, Marcus, you did the right thing.
So your mentor said that. Your boss said that. And I think
Because
that's
he
that's
knew he knew why he hired me. He did not hire me to fill a quota of salespeople. He knew he's getting a different animal here.
well, that's a really interesting thing because doing and sometimes you've got to do the right thing, and the right thing is there might not be a benefit to you, but it is the right thing to do because it'll be a benefit to the other party or the other person.
Yeah.
At that time, though, how hard was it to go back to the office and explain it? knowing that you would have had sales targets, you would have had expectations placed upon
Mm,
you, and that would have potentially created a bit of a gap for you.
yeah,
How did you go about explaining that? And just talk me through, I guess, the attitude, because this leads into, I guess, leadership in terms of how a leader then deals with situations like that that can either make or break the salesperson, pretty much.
yeah. Um, if you allow me, I'd like to extend my answer in terms of your question. So what happened was I was very fortunate that I was hired by my boss as a friend and as a mentor, as a mentee,
Yeah.
and I was not given sales goals
So no
because
quotas.
no. And I can tell you one thing, Darren, he did the right thing because
Okay.
I blew all the sales quota out of the water. So I started in private insurance, and his plan, he was a visionary, crazy. He said, Marcus, within a couple of months, I will move you into SMEs.
Hmm.
And I said, I'm all in. And the thing is, Darren, I did not believe that I had what it takes. I was in his office almost daily. His name was John. And I said, John, I do not believe that I have what it takes, but believe because you do,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
You see that beautiful relationship? So later, after 3 months, when I actually was promoted into SMEs, his boss, who was the regional sales director, was against it. And you know what my boss did? He said, I foot the bill from my own money because I know he will pass, even
Yeah.
if he's such a rookie. So I passed. And then they made the biggest mistake, Darren. They gave me sales quota, and
Okay.
sales quota killed my success.
And why do you say that?
Within a year, I'm a free spirit. As you ask me, how did it affect my sales? It affected my sales zero because I might have walked home with a little bit less money, but I was so elated about this meeting with this old man that the next day I walked into a company and I walked home with so much more money that I would have otherwise because I was flying. I was
Yeah.
on air. And then when they decided, they said, look, now we have to change your structure as well, Marcus. We cannot leave you without a quota. And I remember I was like this, almost on my knees in his office. And I said, please, 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 do not make that mistake. He said, Marcus, it's out of my hands.
Yeah.
Because I said, when you put me under pressure, the whole easiness is gone.
Mm.
And it was gone.
So you put that down to um, was that the implied pressure that you now had a target and that's where the focus was versus without the target you were there to actually truly serve and through
Yeah,
that there was just a natural flow of
yeah,
premiums and quotas. You would have had some form of like indicative quota, but it wasn't a hard and fast.
yeah,
You have to get that target.
exactly. And it has an additional component, which I often see in sales. I was a lot in sales. Even when I was a senior vice president, I reported to the country director. And to him, I said, as this was my last employed position. And I said to him, look, do not make the failure, the mistake to do that what you want to do now. You give an annual goal, and yes, it's fine if you look at quarterly, but you are summoning us on a monthly basis. So on January, end of January, he made the mistake to judge us how we will perform by the end of December. And I said, you're killing everything you could whatever we've built, you just killed in an instant.
Mm,
And that was exactly the problem because, I am all for quotas.
mm,
And let's be honest, and I might be a little bit personal right now, but there are too many salespeople who do need goals. They
Mm.
do need quotas because they will not perform. So
Yeah.
I'm all for that. I have my own salespeople and I give them quota. And some I did not give them quota, but it was necessary.
Mm.
So as soon as you have quota, you have control. And if you have someone who actually goes by the book, this just kills all creativity.
Mm.
And that's what happened with me. At the end of the week, how many meetings did you have? Not enough. No wonder, right? That's sales.
It
Sadly,
is. It is.
sadly. And by the way, I left shortly after that because I said, I cannot do it.
Yeah.
Cannot
Interesting.
do it. I don't
Interesting.
want to kill my career for that.
And yet, and look, I do a lot of work in obviously in sales and
Hmm.
sales teams and sales leaders, and interestingly, the numbers and the research is sort of backing this up. There's something like I think the latest research was that 45% of salespeople are making quota.
I'm not
45%.
surprised. I'm not surprised.
And
Yeah.
there's this, and I know my own experience, there was this disconnect between the company would give you the big goal and the
Hmm.
company because the board would say we need to reach this growth target, we're
Hmm.
going to put that out to the marketplace. That then flows down. They add a bit of mayonnaise on top of it.
Exactly.
By the time it
Yeah.
gets to us, we think, oh my God, how are we going to do that? So literally it's
Yeah.
what you did last year plus 10%, 15%, sometimes
Yes.
50%.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that there's a fine line between having sales quotas as an incentive or a motivational force
Hmm.
and sales quotas that become a huge demotivator when you think, my God,
Yeah.
if I look at my
I
frame of
agree with
reference
that.
as to what I did last year and what we did last year and look forward based on what we've got, and then marry that up with the amount of effort that it took
Hmm.
to get what we did last year, and now without any change in the structure of the business, no more resources, no new products or whatever the case might be,
Increase it
you're
by
asking,
10%.
wow, okay. And they say, well, that's sales. Like it. If you
Yeah.
don't like it,
Yeah.
go and work somewhere else.
So you can tell none of those people has ever worked in sales.
Well, and
You
and
can be
often
absolutely sure.
those sales targets, yes, they're often written by people in finance or COOs or CEOs that have to make a promise to the market or promise to the board.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting then as a leader, and I know you now work with leaders in an executive coaching, you
Hmm.
do advisory and strategic leadership stuff.
Hmm.
And how do you help leaders marry up, I guess, the expectation that we have to grow our business. We have to have a profitable, hopefully sustainably successful business. And the way to do that is to drive growth. The way to drive growth is obviously to sell. The way to sell, it's not product push, but it has to be problem solving, right? So how do we and how do you today, with all of
Hmm.
your experience, right, being the free spirit that you are, how do you help advise leaders today on marrying? Well, how do I get a team that's really free flowing? They're there to serve their customers. They're there to build relationships because relationships will be profitable
Hmm.
and get the numbers.
Hmm. It's a very tricky question. And my answer might surprise you, Darren. Um, Often when I meet my prospective clients, I look at their metaphorical house, and quite often it's crooked. So now I could say, okay, I'm an executive coach. Let's look at your sales quota. Let's look at, whatever numbers, retention rate, whatever, right? And I could go and start working on the screws,
Mm,
and fix that. This is probably what my experience taught me. If a house is crooked, it's usually not the house that's the problem.
mm,
It's the foundation it stands on.
yeah.
So the first thing what I'm doing is, I basically have a three-step in my Leaps leadership program. What I say is, look, at first we look at the leader itself. And quite often it's where the problem lies. I'm a little bit cheeky. I say to my prospective clients, the goal is to create agile employees. Because I can tell you, if I would tell a tech entrepreneur that he is the problem, I'd be done. I'd be cooked. So I say it's the employee because we will create agile employees. So that's
Mm,
the first thing. Because, my clients come to me and say, Marcus, do I speak a different language? So yeah, you do. You speak
mm,
tech and you speak entrepreneur, and your employees and your stakeholders, they speak human.
mm.
Then they first stop and then they start giggling because they understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Often those people have unlearned or never learned to speak human.
Mm,
So that's the leadership issue. The second one, which I actually believe in sales, it's much more prevalent. It's what is total my pet peeve, Darren. It's war of talent and retention. You're familiar with ABC players, right?
mm.
C
Yeah.
players you should fire immediately. B players you should help to grow. And the A players are the ones that I'm interested. I
Yeah.
was always an A player, like a wild horse. You had to give me guidelines left and right, but then you had to let me run.
Yeah.
And that is often the biggest problem.
Mm.
How many micromanagers are working as sales leaders? Ah, some clients, I even say, look, my my midterm vision is to remove you from your position and hire someone who does the leadership
Yeah.
because I can teach you speak and act human,
Yeah.
but this will take way too long.
Yeah.
And that's when I often step in as the interim manager who actually does the war of talent part. Because you see, in sales, let's say you suddenly understand how to hire the right talent. The problem is they will leave you, and rightfully so, right?
Yep.
They're humans. They're humans. They have to be treated like humans, but at the same time, and I think this is the hardest part in leadership, Darren, to marry management with leadership.
Mm.
Honestly, I can't stand that new movement. Everyone is a leader. No, if you're a leader, you can't manage, you fail, especially in
That's it.
sales.
That's
You have
it.
to do both,
You have to do
right?
both. Absolutely, you have
So,
to.
so I help them to hire the right people and I help them to keep the right people. So that often implies we have to get rid of some people.
Mm.
That's the C players,
Yeah.
right? And the third one is team development, where it literally comes down to attitude in terms of the teams. You know it better than I do from sales. If you have an A player and that A player is not dealt fairly, because let's be honest, I was a total diva when I was in sales. I admit that.
Eva.
Total diva. A wild horse. I was a racehorse of the honestly of the highest quality. And I
Just
wanted
let
to
me
be
run.
treated as such. So I help my clients and say, look, you have to learn how to deal with this diva. If you don't learn it, they will always be a stumbling block in your success. You know? So it's about the leadership in terms of helping the leader itself. It's about the war of talent and retention. And then it's about the team development and make sure that the ambience and everything is intact.
Love it.
That's
Love
what
it.
I usually do. And that works.
Nice. So we'll talk about your leap process, but I do want to get to
Mhm,
imposter syndrome as well. But before we jump
mhm,
into, I want to ask you a question about imposter syndrome. Um,
mhm,
so when you're working then with those type of leaders, because you mentioned
mhm,
quite rightly that a great leader also has to have some really good capabilities around management, because
mhm.
if you don't have things that you can measure, it's very difficult to manage. So you need to have that. But
Exactly.
good managers don't automatically equal good leaders, and good leaders who can't manage are not necessarily good leaders. So you have to have both.
Right. Yep.
One of the questions that I'm always grappling with when I'm working with my clients is how to help a leader, and I use that term as in terms of a title, get away from, I guess, the external pressure or sometimes the self-imposed pressure to
Mhm,
focus on the day-to-day stuff, the operational stuff that takes time and energy away from the strategic
mhm,
growth, right? So I understand you've got to have one eye on the current situation and how we're tracking, but also a good
Mhm,
leader will look at what's happening in the next 30, 60, 90 days.
mhm,
So, how do you, as an executive coach in the world that you operate in, help a leader, I guess, separate or prioritize the things that need to happen, which I call the hygiene factors today, without micromanaging,
mhm,
but
mhm,
also enable to create the vision and encourage people to come on the journey? Because
mhm,
ultimately, it's the leader that can set the vision and go the way and show the way that ultimately will override or oversee a
mhm,
sustainable team, a sustainably
mhm,
successful team. So how do you do that? How do you help a leader go from being, because sometimes leaders are thrust into leadership positions and they've been a great individual
mhm,
contributor and they know no different. So they get involved in the
mhm,
micromanagement day to day.
mhm, mhm. It's a loaded question.
A
Um,
loaded question.
it really is because it's like if I would dissect it, you'd be shocked how much is in that one question. I like it. Um, you mentioned my Leaps leadership playbook. So what it really comes down to, it's the L. L is leverage. And when I speak with prospective clients or with my current clients, Darren, I realize one thing. Leadership is totally underestimated
Mm,
because you have a title, you can lead. And if someone goes on my LinkedIn profile and goes into my posts, just my banner, think you lead question mark.
mm.
And I wanted to write think again, but that was a little bit too provocative for the banner picture. But that's actually what I do in my posts. So I'm very straightforward about that. Because what I want to say is not, I don't want to, sorry, my French, I don't want to piss off people, but I want to make sure that they understand, unless they understand exactly like sales is a art form, which is almost lost, to be honest. Leading is the exact same thing.
Mm,
Simply because you suddenly have a leadership position, it doesn't make you a leader. And when people come to me and say the the key to leadership is having a service attitude and all these beautiful things, I say, sorry, I was a classical trained singer. Talent was a prerequisite. The exact same thing. Service orientation is a prerequisite for a leader or a salesperson.
mm,
It's about the skill, it's about the craft, the art itself. So I say the most undervalued thing, Darren, is leverage. It's about maximizing resources and talents, which in the end will drive business and leadership success. So instead of putting more money into training and everything else, they should realize, gosh, we have all the resources on board. I, as a leader, have to learn what it means to leverage that to the best of the company and the best of my people. And in the end, my top line.
mm, mm.
So that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
When, when I speak with my friends, many of them went to MIT and Harvard and all these organizations. And I say, Marcus, I wished we would have had a course which you actually talked about, your Leaps leadership playbook.
Yeah.
Because just the leverage part itself
Yeah.
is a game changer. And it's all attitude and mindset, nothing
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. So let's talk about that because we'll then delve into imposter syndrome. So
Mhm,
the Leaps playbook is, or the Leap leadership playbook, 4 steps, leverage your strengths.
mhm,
So, and I like the way you mentioned the attitude around, and this has to be a belief system that we do have the resources already within us, right? But the question I
mhm,
have to ask myself as a leader is, am I getting as much out of those resources as I possibly could be? So what's my utilization rate of my resources? Could we do things differently? Could we do things better? Which requires a leader to think differently, think outside the square, not just accept things as they appear
mhm,
to be. So
mhm,
are there any other elements within the leverage that I think would be pertinent as a leader, especially in 2024,
mhm,
in relation to, and I say this in that the market in Australia, for example, is quite challenging. There's not a lot of
Mhm,
good talent that's out on the marketplace. And I remember talking to
mhm,
another mentor last week, and he said, "You know what, Darren? It's interesting that really high performing salespeople and sales leaders are not
mhm.
actually on the marketplace. They're
No,
not in
yeah,
the
that's
market.
a fact.
It's the ones that
That's
are
a
typically
fact.
underperforming that are right
Yep.
now. If people are
Yeah,
listening to this and
exactly.
in the market, we're not talking about you, but it's a generalization. But are there other things to be conscious of that we could be leveraging that perhaps as leaders we're not at the moment, or we're overlooking it?
Yeah, you totally speak to my heart, Darren. As I mentioned before, the second pillar in terms of pain points I work with is war for talent and retention. So you mentioned the leaps, and the fourth one, the partner,
Hmm.
has very much to do with leverage. Um, you're familiar with networking, right? To your surprise, I hate networking because networking means I reach out to one person, to another, to another, to another, to another, and I amass a huge Rolodex of connections.
Yeah,
To what prevail? Nothing. I have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 connections. That's actually what LinkedIn looks like most of the
yeah,
times.
yeah,
So if I have 5 minutes, I'd love to explain where that comes from or comes from now. Do I have 5 minutes?
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Okay. So imagine I was this managing director, senior vice president, as I mentioned in my last engaged position.
Hmm.
And I had the task to organize enough connections for 100 high level executives being fired in the next 12 months internationally. Doesn't sound much, right? Good.
No.
Mhm. I've been teaching for almost 20 years and I lost all touch with economy worldwide. And I was
Yeah.
very well connected before. So we invited managers who are fired to a apero. We were the hosts, and I freaked out, Darren, because I lost the art of speaking with people.
Right.
I was in a corner, and my partner, female partner, came to me and said, Marcus, what's going on?
Yeah.
We have to host. It's the easiest thing in the world. They
Hmm.
came for us.
Yeah.
I said, Barbara, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it. So I left that night, went back home, went to my friend, and I said, Chris, I have a problem. I don't have any connections anymore, and I don't know
Mm.
how to make connections. He asked, how many do you have left? I said, 5.
5.
He said, yeah, Marcus, you're screwed. So what
You're
happened then?
screwed.
Yeah, it was very straightforward. He didn't mince his words. So he said, Marcus, let's do one thing. Send me one of those clients and I'll see what I can do. So I sent it to him. He called me back after that meeting and said, Marcus, that was such an amazing time with this guy. So I thought, okay, let's see what the other guy says. The other guy calls me and he says, Marcus, thank you so much for connecting me with Chris. And then it came. You wouldn't believe it, Marcus. He already connected me with 3 people. And then I knew I struck gold. And that's when the working the net was born. Because Chris said to me, let's sit together for a half an hour and look at something together. Let's look at your 5 connections, your 4 next to me.
Yeah.
At that time, it was 20 years back. At that time, we looked at these 4 connections, including his, and we had more than 10,000 quality first level connections. You can imagine second level, third level. So what we've done is I reached out to these 4 other people, and these 5, Darren, made it possible for me to cater these 100 high level clients with enough connections internationally. And that's when I knew, wow, I don't need to cater to 10,000 connections on LinkedIn.
Mm.
I have to make sure that these 5 are taken care of.
Yeah.
And that's how I worked.
Yeah.
And that's how I still work. I have 5 people I'm very constant connection with. And they literally say, you know what, Marcus, whatever you need, reach out to me. Because one of my connections has it.
Hmm.
Same thing when I'm in Boston right now.
Yeah.
I reach out to someone and said, look, would you be willing to introduce me? Said, say the word.
Mm,
And that's what it comes down to. When a sales manager or an entrepreneur understands that this is an art form of working the net, building trust,
mm.
they will never have to worry about not having enough talents. They will never have to worry about that.
I like that because I was talking to another mentor a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the number one role of a leader or sales leader in this case, and it was to recruit. And when we're saying recruiting, it wasn't necessarily recruiting for a position, but it's what you're talking about,
Mhm,
building a network, building a trusted
mhm,
network that when the opportunity does arrive, you've got a ready-made group of people that not so much you can rely upon, but you can potentially talk about an opportunity if there's a match versus waiting for the opportunity to come up and then going, okay, who is available? And it almost like
mhm.
becomes a bit of a shopping thing, right? And that's what you see a lot of people do. And a lot of salespeople do the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, it's the same thing if someone is on a job hunt, right? Once they see the ad, it's already too late.
Mm,
Like I always say, look, my sister, for example, I told her the biggest challenge for you is to build your network so you have it before you need it.
mm.
That's just what it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Simply
absolutely.
like build it before you need it. I think this is very much the key.
Totally.
And
So,
actually to acknowledge that it is not coming innately. Like
yeah,
when
well,
I teach people working the net, they realize, gosh, Marcus, you are speaking from a different planet. It's like, because it
we're
is.
working the
It
net.
is a different planet.
Yeah, but it's not. But it's and look, there are people out there that love to have and they love to go after the vanity metrics, right? Whether it be on
Mhm,
Facebook and even in some degrees LinkedIn. But you've got to build a connection, but the connection has to be relevant, right? There has to
mhm,
be. Do we have
mhm,
something mutually in common? Otherwise, we've got a question. Well, right now, I'm not quite sure there is anything in common. So
mhm,
why are we connecting? Now, apart from the fact you might be a nice person, that might be different. So if I have a
mhm,
conversation with somebody, for example, and we may be in different industries or in different roles, and there may not be anything obvious that would be in common
mhm.
from a business perspective. If they're a good person, I'm probably still going to connect with them on LinkedIn because it's just, hey, it's a good place to
Congratulations.
continue a conversation and to build some familiarity around. But there are a lot of people out there just, oh, I've got 50,000 connections here and
Yeah,
friend groups of X. But do you actually know them?
that's the thing. You know, if I might interject something, what is so interesting is when we meet in person, we have all the five senses. Online takes two away at
Mm,
least. So we left with two and a half senses. And people believe it became easier. Goodness me. Like, honestly, every salesperson who's listening, learn the art of interacting with real human beings in real time. Because that's where the key is.
it is, and it's a bit of a throwaway line, but it's so true. And it's people at the end of the day, irrespective of the technology, they still want to do business with people who they know, who they like, and
Yes.
who they trust. So
Yes.
the question is,
Yes.
are you a likable person? Are you respectful? Can you respect others? And can people trust you? Because if you don't have those, then you might have the best product on the place on the face of the earth, but nobody's going to buy it because you're a dick.
I would love to share a secret. When I teach working the net, my first question is always this: who is the most important person when two people meet? You meet someone else. And I say, pledge and be honest. And 8 out of 10 have to say it's me.
Yeah,
And I say, yeah, that's the problem.
yeah,
Do you remember when I told you how I did the 8 out of 10 quota, seven out of
yeah,
10? I was
absolutely.
interested in the other person.
That's it.
And
And
that what creates trust.
that's it. And that's the differentiation. So if
Yes.
you are genuine, I think was it Zig Ziglar or maybe Jim Rohn said if you're genuinely interested in other people, genuinely, and this is not faking it, you have to be
No.
genuinely interested in
Yep.
other
Yep.
people, more times than not, you will then become interesting to those people because you make it about them. It's not about you. All right.
Absolutely true. Yeah, could have come
So,
from both.
which leads us to imposter syndrome, which I know is a
Mm,
huge thing, and all of us have it to some degree, right?
yeah.
Um, what's because I know you do a lot of work around this, and I'm sure that
Mhm,
the executives that you work with, particularly ones that have, as you were talking before, have been displaced. Um,
mhm,
a lot of them may have had egos dented and things have happened
mhm,
to them they didn't expect, which only accentuates, I guess, this
mhm,
view of, you know what, I've now been found out. Um,
mhm.
first of all, how big is it in your eyes? And uh, what are some of the things to think about in terms of not overcoming it, but maybe handling it and being genuine about that?
Mhm. So let me quote David Meltzer, who is a mentor of mine. And he's actually one of the biggest sports guys in the US. I was on a call with him, and I first thought I misunderstood because he said, Marcus, imposter syndrome is more prevalent than mummy issues. And a friend said, oh, he must have said money issues. So I went on a call with him later on, and I asked him, David, um, what exactly did you say? He said, okay, let me say it like this: MOMMY. And I understood because he said, Marcus, you are onto something which will become such a huge problem in very short time. Such a huge problem. And in the meantime, look at how many people speak and write about imposter syndrome.
Mm,
Almost everyone is jumping on that bandwagon because there's a
yeah.
reason why. However, the thing is, I wrote about imposter syndrome, and some of my friends reached out to me and said, can I have a word? Okay. I recognize the symptoms, but I do not identify with imposter syndrome. That made me think. And I realized something. Imposter syndrome is pseudo. And I might shock some people what I'm going to say now, especially
Mm,
psychologists and doctors and all these specialties. Imposter syndrome is a symptom of something way more dangerous than they believe imposter syndrome is. Imposter syndrome is a symptom of an authenticity struggle, which comes from we have no bloody clue who we are. We have never learned to trust that what we do not know who we are. And that's why we go into this imposter syndrome.
yeah.
Because you see, I went through a burnout during COVID. And I can tell you, Darren, I did not trust anything anymore. I knew, I read, and somebody else wrote about me because I was at the point where I said it can't be true.
Mm,
And I'm pretty sure many of our listeners actually feel the exact same way.
mm.
And that's when I realized, have I ever met a lazy person who had imposter syndrome? No, no, never. Have I ever met an underperformer who suffered from imposter syndrome? No, no. So it dawned on me that imposter syndrome is actually a compliment by the universe saying, Darren and Marcus, you are onto something that's worth it. Push through instead of imposter syndrome.
Mm.
And that's when I understood the problem is the word, is the term. Imagine I'm a psychiatrist. We meet each other. You tell me about your symptoms, and I say, Darren, you are suffering from imposter syndrome. Sorry, you're cooked.
Yeah.
You're
Well,
screwed. You're screwed because
yeah.
doctors usually take different ideas or symptoms, put them together because they do not understand it, and now it's a syndrome. So I can tell you, I really make myself enemies in terms of my posts on LinkedIn because I'm going against the grain.
Yeah.
I'm saying my specialty is not speaking about imposter syndrome. My specialty is debunking the concept of imposter syndrome.
Mm,
So I say, welcome what is called imposter syndrome, and understand you're flying toward the stratosphere. And when it gets really hot, say, thank you, universe, for sending me a task that's worthwhile,
mm,
and push through and push through. Because on the other side, we have the authenticity struggle here. And when you push through the stratosphere, on the other side, what waits is authentic confidence. You feel the word, right?
mm,
Authenticity and confidence.
yeah.
These two paired, unbeatable.
Mm.
Unbeatable.
So when you look at that, um, so when I look at imposter syndrome, I look at it from a perspective of I'm I'm almost pretending to some degree to be somebody that I authentically, maybe deep down, don't believe I am, or I'm trying to keep up appearances. So,
Mhm,
and that for many people can be really challenging.
mhm,
But what we're saying is, hey, that's a label. If you
mhm.
can focus on who you are at your core, which means you need to probably do some work on who you are, right?
Yes. Mhm.
What makes you tick, what you believe in, what you stand for, and
Yes.
then lead with that. Let
Mhm.
others maybe label, but I'm
Yes.
not an imposter. I am who I am. I am who I
Yes.
am, and I happen to be doing this role. Others might see, well, that kind of doesn't fit, but that's okay. I'm doing it anyway because I'm pushing forward. So
Mhm.
I love the description of authentic confidence because I reckon certainly from a leader's point of view, ultimately that's what we want to be. We want to be an authentic leader to the point where
Mhm.
I should be able to have the confidence to go into any environment and hold any conversation and
Mhm.
know that I can hold my own because I have integrity, because I have authenticity, because I can build relationships and build trust, and I don't have to pretend.
Mhm. I'd like to add something which might really surprise you. The term imposter syndrome means despite of all the experience, despite of all the successes I had, I do not trust. That's what this imposter syndrome is all about. Despite of all the successes I had. So guess what I have to do with my clients? I have to unearth their successes.
Yeah,
I have to unearth their wins. And
yeah,
all I have to do is have to reiterate them, remind them of it.
yeah.
That's all it takes.
Mm,
But if you believe in imposter syndrome as almost like a death sentence, and especially women, I meet so many women who say to me, Marcus, I suffer from imposter syndrome. I said, yes, you do. And you won't get better.
mm.
You won't get better. Psychiatrists will love you as a patient because you won't get better. So understand imposter syndrome is a symptom of the much bigger problem called authenticity struggle. And authenticity struggle is because you do not know yourself. You cannot trust yourself. How would you trust someone who you don't know,
Mm,
who you don't trust? No chance.
mm,
And I could tell you about so many different beautiful client experiences where someone from an ugly duckling, and that person was so successful, was confronted with a task, with a challenge. She did not believe she could do it. All I had to do is I had to remind her of the past experience and the past successes. And sometimes I even said, look, trust me because I believe in you.
mm,
And they thrived.
mm. Yeah, I
But
love
you
that.
see, this debunking has to take place first.
Yeah.
And I
And
have
so
many
with
people,
that,
they don't like me.
no, well, it's because you're probably authentic.
Oh, you probably understand that imposter syndrome has become a huge industry.
Oh, it is. It is.
A
It's just,
lot of coaches
yeah,
make huge money with imposter syndrome.
yeah,
Huge money.
yeah. Um, so mate, as we sort of bring this into a landing,
Mhm,
I love something practical that you might use with a client to help them really
mhm,
tap into this authenticity, knowing self, right? And whether it be a process or some things that people can think
mhm,
about. there'll be people listening to this that understand the concept of imposter syndrome, and if they're really honest, have felt that at some stage, right? Like
Mhm.
what you were talking about before in the being in the corner of that networking event, you
Mhm.
maybe to some degree was feeling as if I don't belong here, right? I'm an imposter. What's going on, right? Hence, you
Absolutely.
had to
Yeah.
leave the environment. So
Yeah.
some things that we can either think about or start putting into practice that can help us delve into this
Yeah.
authenticity struggle and turn that around and use it for good, not for evil, so we can
Yeah. Yeah.
thrive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I believe what we have to learn at first, and that's something which actually happens really fast, we have to learn to reframe success.
Yeah.
Um, we talked about tracking the numbers before. We should look at the process instead of the results. We should start becoming aware how our daily work actually looks like. And when you start breaking down a day, you suddenly realize, gosh, there's so many wins. And if you then do your work and say, what led to it?
Mm.
Then you suddenly realize, gosh, I'm not that bad. You know, I've been able to do it before. I might be able to do it now.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, which I often recommend, is build peer support. Especially we guys. Who reaches out to another man and says, you know what, Darren, I really feel like an imposter, right?
I went.
And and yeah, and I'd love to explain to you how I feel. No, most guys would not do it.
Yeah,
And then we suddenly find out, ta-da, everyone suffers from it.
that's it.
So talk about it. Talk about it. And what I always love about peer support is find someone who you trust and then build a kind of an accountability system in it. Because quite often when I am actually hit by imposter syndrome, I say to a buddy of mine, you know what? Please hold me accountable because I have to follow through
Mm.
to push through the stratosphere. Total. And the third one, and that's probably something that might shock some people, build resilience.
Mm.
Build resilience, especially in sales. Goodness me, we have the constant pressure for results, this frequent rejection thing. There's a high visibility. You're basically in the limelight all the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying it is so important that we learn to build resilience. And believe me, no one is born resilient.
Mm.
No one. And actually, the one thing which might surprise you is learn meditating.
Mm.
When I'm asked what helped you mostly during COVID and your burnout, which basically is the depression, it was me to learn to meditate
Okay.
or mindfulness, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Because resilience comes from you
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah,
It's
we do.
nothing you can gain or buy from outside.
No, no. And through meditation, through mindfulness, you start to learn more about yourself and tap into your innermost resources
Absolutely.
that are always there. They're always there. But it's the belief. It's a
Absolutely.
belief system.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And don't see yourself as an oak tree because many men want to be an oak tree. I say, learn to become nimble and bendable as a bamboo
Yeah.
because bamboo will never break as
Yeah.
much as you bend it. It always
Yeah.
comes back.
Yeah.
So it's the flexibility, and actually we have so much to learn from the Eastern world in the
Mm.
West.
Mm.
You know, like there is
100%.
one beautiful thing, and I'd like to end my answer here. It's the word responsibility. Here in the West, it's something really heavy.
Mm.
You know, shoulder responsibility.
Yeah.
In the Asian world or in the Eastern world, it's different. It's the ability to respond.
Mm.
And if a salesperson understands that and develop that attitude, I have the ability to respond to anything.
Yeah.
It makes it so much easier and so much lighter.
Absolutely. And that
And
through that
admit,
process.
admit you have a problem. That's the biggest issue for people. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. You probably realize I don't mince my words so much, and you can imagine how I talk with my clients.
Yeah.
But that's what they need and that's what they love.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Love it.
So
Awesome. Hey, love this conversation. We've gone in lots of different directions, but it's been a really enjoyable conversation. I think there's a lot of gold nuggets throughout that. So, Marcus, for people that are
wonderful.
listening that like to know more about you and
Mhm.
connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that? How can we connect with
Okay,
you?
so the best place to connect with me is definitely on LinkedIn because I'm there on a daily basis. If you're interested in learning more about imposter syndrome and how to deal with that, especially debunking,
Yeah,
my LinkedIn feed is the best thing. It's very simple. It's my first name. It's MarkusNeukom, and I'm sure you will share the details
yeah,
with the viewer and listener as well. So please just come on LinkedIn, reach out to me, send me a direct message, and I'm very happy to have a conversation with anyone who's interested to learn more.
nice, brilliant, love it. So as we bring this to close, as because I know it's probably what is it now, late evening in
Quarter
Boston, so
past
it's
7
quarter
p.m.
past 7 p.m. So it's dinner time, or as we say in Australia, beer o'clock. Um,
I love that.
if there was if there was
There's
one,
always beer o'clock somewhere in the world, right?
it certainly is, Marcus. It
That's the beauty.
certainly is. Absolutely, absolutely. So if there's one parting piece of guidance or wisdom that you'd like to leave people, whether it be around imposter syndrome or taking the leap through the stratosphere or being a better leader for your team, whether it be in sales or in operations or whatever, what would that be? Particularly as we come closer to the end of the year.
I really want to quote once again David Meltzer because he taught me so much. And it's so simple. Be more interested than interesting. It sums it up.
Yeah, love it, love it. And I personally believe that if that can become um, a mantra for you, and when I say you, as in you listening to this, then just watch what's going to happen, right? Not just in terms of your influence, not just in terms of your sales numbers, but just in terms of your overall relationships with people. Because I've got to
And I'd love to
say,
leave with someone more about the imposter syndrome. And this is coming from my spiritual guru. This too shall pass.
yeah, it will. I
Whatever
won't
happens,
finish.
nothing will stay. This too shall pass.
It will. Absolutely. So, Marcus, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much
Same here.
for jumping
Thank you
on.
for
I'm
having me,
glad we did
Darren.
this because we were going to do this about a week ago, but somebody lost their voice. So it's been
You
terrific to
see, it's
connect.
back.
It is back. It is back, and really enjoyed this conversation. So thanks once
Same
again
here.
for being a guest on the
Thank
Exceptional
you so
Sales Leader
much, Darren.
podcast. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.